The cabin that time forgot. It began on a misty morning when the lake looked like glass and the pines whispered with the wind. I had just settled into my old cabin again after years of being away. It was my father's place, a quiet, hand-built refuge on the water's edge, tucked away behind the newer developments that had grown like weeds around it. The town had changed. What used to be open land and scattered cottages had turned into a maze of modern houses and strict homeowner association rules. When I left for the city decades ago, the lake was free, open to anyone who respected its calm. Now, the HOA claimed it as private property. They'd fenced sections, posted signs, and even hired security to keep outsiders away, even though I'd been there before most of them were born. Still, I thought nothing of it when I came back to restore the old cabin. It needed repairs, and I needed the peace. The neighbors stared when I arrived in my old truck. A few whispered, wondering who the old man by the lake was. It didn't take long for her to appear. Karen, the HOA president. You could spot her from a mile away. Perfectly pressed shirt, clipboard tucked under her arm, that permanent squint of self-importance. She walked up the gravel drive like she owned the land beneath her shoes. From the moment she introduced herself, she made it clear that I didn't belong. According to her, the cabin sat within HOA jurisdiction, and anyone occupying it without HOA approval was subject to removal. I told her politely that I'd owned the cabin for nearly 40 years. My father's name was on the original deed. But she wasn't listening. She didn't care about deeds, only about power. Over the next few days, the harassment began. Letters taped to my door demanding I vacate unauthorized property. HOA representatives trespassing to inspect compliance. Even warning notes accusing me of illegal occupation. They didn't understand, or maybe didn't want to. The HOA's reach stopped long before my fence line. Their fancy subdivision had expanded toward the lake, but the land my cabin sat on was never theirs to claim. One evening, I was out by the dock, fishing as the sun dipped low, when headlights appeared on the dirt road. Karen's SUV rolled in, followed by a security vehicle. She stepped out, phone already in hand, talking loudly about violators and trespassing. Within minutes, red and blue lights flashed through the trees. She'd called 911. The officers arrived with polite caution, asking questions, inspecting documents, listening to her frantic explanations about community rights. Karen tried to convince them that I was squatting on restricted property. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the property line she was so sure about didn't just stop at my fence. It stretched far beyond it. The entire lake, the surrounding woods, and every inch of the road leading into her so-called community still legally belonged to me. It was all there in black and white, the original survey, the deed, the county registry. I hadn't said a word yet. I watched her talk, pacing like she was rehearsing for a courtroom drama. The officers looked confused, unsure of what to believe. Then one of them turned to me and asked for identification. I handed over my license, and a copy of the deed I'd brought from the county clerk's office that morning. He read it once, then twice. His eyes widened slightly. Karen's voice faltered. The color drained from her face as the officer looked her way. That was the moment the balance shifted. I could see it in her expression, the instant realization that everything she thought she owned, every rule she'd written, every no trespassing sign she'd proudly posted, stood on land that wasn't hers to govern. The lake was mine. The roads were mine. And soon, she'd learn that her entire subdivision existed on a lease older than her HOA itself. She tried to argue, but the officer stopped her, asking her to step aside while they confirmed ownership through dispatch. The wind picked up across the water, and for the first time in years, I felt my father's presence in the stillness, proud, steady, waiting. Karen stood there trembling, clutching her clipboard as though it could protect her. The officer handed my documents back, nodded once, and said something quietly to his partner. Karen's phone slipped from her hand. And in that moment I knew, This was only the beginning. The county records reveal everything. By sunrise the next morning, word had spread through the entire Lakeside community. The trespasser Karen had called the cops on wasn't just some stubborn old man. He was the original landowner, the one whose name still lingered in dusty county books and faded map. But Karen didn't back down. People like her never do. When power slips through their fingers, they don't accept it, they tighten their grip. That same afternoon, she called an emergency HOA meeting. I wasn't invited, of course, but I didn't need to be. The voices carried across the lake. I heard my name thrown around with words like illegal, loophole, and fraud. She told the crowd that I was manipulating outdated paperwork to scare them. And they believed her, or pretended to. No one wants to admit they built their dream home on borrowed ground. I drove into town that evening, papers stacked neatly in a folder beside me. The county clerk, a man in his 60s who'd known my father, met me with a slow smile. He already knew why I'd come. He led me to a back room lined with archives, shelves of records that hadn't seen daylight in decades. When he unrolled the original survey map, the truth was plain to see. The land encompassing the entire lake, including the subdivision roads, had never been transferred to the HOA or the developer. They'd built on it under a long-term usage lease that had quietly expired 5 years ago. In other words, the HOA's power ended the moment that lease did. The clerk helped me pull every document, every boundary mark, and every tax record. Each one told the same story. My family still held legal title to the land beneath their perfectly paved streets and landscaped lawns. The homes were theirs, yes, but the ground they stood on was mine. Karen had no idea how deep this ran. The next day, I filed an ownership verification with the county office. It triggered an automatic audit, and once the assessor saw the discrepancy, the entire subdivision was placed under review. Overnight, HOA operations were temporarily suspended until the investigation was complete. Karen's empire began to crack. Neighbors started whispering again, but this time about her. They questioned how she could have missed such an important legal detail. Some were furious, others were scared. The thought of their property values depending on one old cabin owner terrified them. By the weekend, the county posted a notice at the entrance of the community. Property ownership under review, access and authority subject to county oversight. It was the first time Karen couldn't remove a sign. That night, I sat on my porch watching headlights trickle out of the subdivision. A few homeowners stopped by my gate, not to argue but to ask questions. They wanted to understand what would happen next. I told them calmly that I wasn't there to take anything away. I just wanted to restore what was mine and preserve the lake as it was meant to be, free from endless restrictions and overreach. Most nodded in quiet relief. They were tired of fines, rules, and threats. But Karen wasn't done. She filed a motion with the county board, demanding an emergency injunction against my claim. She accused me of forging documents and creating confusion among residents. She wanted me removed from my own land. When I received the notice, I didn't react. My son, a real estate attorney, handled the response. Within 48 hours, he submitted an official counterclaim with the deed history, tax receipts, and lease expiration record. The board scheduled a hearing for the following week. Karen spent those days trying to rally support, but the neighborhood was divided. Some still clung to her authority, but most had seen through the performance. Her clipboard didn't look as powerful anymore. Her tone no longer commanded fear. On the morning of the hearing, she arrived in a spotless white blazer, chin high, surrounded by a few loyal supporters. I walked in quietly behind her, file in hand. The county officials took their seats, the air tense with curiosity. When the clerk presented the original documents and the expired lease record, Karen's confidence began to falter. Each paper pulled another thread from her story. By the time they reached the last page, there was nothing left for her to stand on. The chairperson's verdict was simple. The property rights, including the lake and surrounding land, reverted fully to me upon lease expiration. The HOA no longer held any authority over the area. The silence that followed was almost kind. Karen just sat there, hands trembling, her perfect blazer now wrinkled under the weight of reality. She had called 911 to remove me from my cabin, and now, I legally owned the ground beneath her $1 million home. And I wasn't finished yet. The day the HOA fell, the ruling spread through the neighborhood faster than a storm. By noon, every homeowner knew the truth. The land, the lake, the roads, all belonged to me. The HOA's authority was dissolved effective immediately. Their bylaws, their fines, their endless threats, all gone in a single decision. Karen tried to spin the story, telling residents the board had made a temporary error, but no one believed her anymore. Letters from the county confirmed it. The HOA had operated illegally for years after the lease expired. The so-called association had no right to enforce anything. Every fee, every violation, every fine they'd ever issued was now invalid. Homeowners lined up outside my gate that evening, not to argue, but to thank me. They were tired of being told what color their mailbox should be, tired of fines for flowers planted too close to the walkway. For the first time in years, they felt free. Karen, however, refused to surrender gracefully. She barricaded herself in the HOA office, claiming she would appeal the ruling. She sent emails filled with accusations and conspiracy theories, that I had connections, that the county was corrupt. But when investigators arrived to retrieve the HOA's financial records, everything unraveled. Thousands in misused funds. Personal expenses labeled as community maintenance. It was all there. Within a week, Karen resigned under investigation. The once feared queen of the HOA left in silence, her house up for sale, her reputation in ruins. As for me, I kept the lake open. I let the families fish, kayak, and enjoy what was always meant to be shared. I rebuilt my father's cabin with my son's help, keeping the spirit of the place alive. Honest, simple, and free. Every evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I watched the water turn gold. The same lake Karen tried to claim as hers now reflected nothing but peace. It wasn't victory that I felt, it was restoration. Order returned where arrogance once reigned. And in that quiet stillness I realized something. Some people chase power, others chase peace. Only one of them ever sleeps well at night.